When are we gonna get there?
I asked.
Just shut up. We're about there,
said my coworker James. James and I were on a job to investigate a report of a missing person on the southeastern side of the Yellowstone National Park.
So, I'm reading the file. The girl's wearing a blouse. It's 42 degrees Fahrenheit outside.
I exclaimed.
I don't know, dude. I've seen people on the side roads with nothing but a Speedo.
I look at James and laugh. It's rounding 5:25 p.m. and the sun is setting.
Okay, so the map says that we're close. Around 15 minutes.
James says. I look out the window and watch the tree line. We'd been driving to the backwoods for around 2 hours.
Do you still have any cigarettes?
I ask.
Nope. I smoked my last one an hour ago.
Frustrated, I turn back to watch the road. This drive had been so boring. Most of the time, there was a radio tower to give my phone signal. We drive in silence for a while.
You know, we're probably not gonna find her,
says James.
What makes you think that?
I ask.
Have you ever figured out that we don't find missing people very often?
I pondered that statement for a while, and I did realize that we don't ever find anyone really. Or at least when we do, they're dead.
Bill, you alright?
He asked me, looking periodically at me while driving.
Huh? Yeah, I just never really thought of it like that before.
Just as I finished that sentence, our radio came through.
Bill, James, got a lead on the missing girl. Over.
The operator's voice came again, saying,
Head to the south entrance off the side road 1/2 mile past Grant Village. Over.
Punch in the coordinates,
James said quickly, pulling a U-turn and speeding through the side road and onto the main trail. At this point, we were speeding through the trails, the sky turning a dark red, and the sun below the trees getting darker and darker. I never liked the dark. Even now, being 24, I still don't like the dark. I wonder sometimes, what could be out in the vast wilderness besides what we know? As I'm daydreaming, James hits the brakes and we stop.
Bill, grab your flashlight and grab your pistol.
I grab my handgun and my flashlight to step out of the Jeep. The air was so heavy. It felt really weird. Like that feeling you get when you're frightened and there's no reason to be paranoid, but you still are. We closed the Jeep doors and started into the woods, walking quickly, shining our beams of light in different directions. The air was so tense you could cut it with a knife. We walked for 30 more minutes, and we found something under some leaves. A small, brown sneaker.
This is James. We found a small sneaker. Could this have any correlation with the missing girl? Over.
James spoke through his radio.
No idea, James. Keep it moving. Radio in if you need backup. Over.
James nodded and said,
All right. Over.
Then he put his radio back in its chest holster. James looked at me and gave me the 2 fingers pointing up then down to make me move forward. So far, I feel that we've walked around 200 yards. As I kept walking, I stepped on a large piece of cloth. I shine my light at it.
Looks like a part of a blouse. James!
I call out. He comes over to me quickly.
Is that part of a blouse?
Yeah. He radios in the evidence and we keep going. I start to feel like something is with us. I don't know how to explain it. It's as if something or someone was watching us from the trees.
James? Do you feel that? Do I feel what? Well, I feel that something's like, I don't know, watching us or something. It just doesn't feel right here.
At this point, I think we were somewhere between Heart Lake and the Yellowstone River. We stop for a second and we pull out some waters.
James, how long have we been walking here?
I ask, and he turns to look at me, then looks at his watch.
Around 40 minutes.
I look down at the ground and take a swig of water. I finish it, swallowing the last drop. Then, I hear something. I look in the distance and focus on the sound. I scrunch my face and aim an ear to the sound to determine what it is. It sounds like crying, with moaning added between the sobs. I slapped James's shoulder without moving my gaze.
Do you hear that?
He does the same as me, and the two of us listen for a while. The sound isn't moving, it's staying in the same place. We listen, and I look at James with a confused expression on my face. As I look at him, the sound stops. By this time, the moon was somewhat lighting up the forest in front of us, so I was able to scan the woods. It's then that I see movement in the corner of my eye. I flick on my light and shine where the path of the movement was going. I saw a human foot pass by a tree.
Holy crap.
I take off with my light and pistol drawn. I was following a figure running through the woods, and it was fast, like a marathon runner. James was right behind me and was saying that we needed to get closer.
What do you want me to do?
I ask.
Run to the left and try to run across her.
I ran to the left and tried to catch up with the missing girl. We lost her in the darkness. The two of us stood there for a second and listened again. We looked around. Then I looked at James.
Did you see how fast she was running? I don't know how a little girl can run so fast,
James said, breathing heavily. We caught our breath, and the sobbing, moaning sound came again from the left of us. We decided to go on a slower approach. We methodically moved in an oval shape to the sound. I was creeping up on them, and I didn't have my light on. But something looked off with how her body looked. Her back was humped, and she had her arms retracted under her chest, like a T-Rex is portrayed having its arms held under its chest. At this time, we were 50 feet away from her. James sounded off at her, saying,
Little girl, we're rangers. We're here to take you.
He stopped dead in his tracks. I whispered to him,
What's the matter?
He didn't answer. He just kept staring at the girl, mumbling something in fright.
What is he looking at?
I thought to myself, feeling that there was no reason to be afraid. It's just a little girl, I told myself, turning on and aiming my flashlight at her. I'll try my best to describe what I saw. The memory itself has already given me goosebumps just thinking about it. When I turned on the light, the little girl was standing with her back to me. The first thing I noticed was how messed up her back was. It was bent in an unnatural angle downward into a hump. Her vertebrae made it look like she had spikes coming off of her back. She slowly turned around, and when she did, I could feel all my blood leave my face, and a sharp, bone-chilling coldness ran down my body. When she made the full turn to face me, I saw that her legs were like birds' legs. The knee was bent inwards, and her lower legs were coming out past her hips. I looked further up. She was so malnourished that her pelvis was showing through her skin. Her arms had shortened, and she only had 3 fingers on each hand. Her head and neck are what haunts me the most, as her neck had merged with the back of her head and connected with the rest of her skin. And her mouth. God, the mouth. It looked like her cheeks had been sawn down the side and went down into her neck. She moved her mouth and the jaw squirmed and shook with each movement. All the while, she was moaning and crying at us, screaming at us with a gurgled tone in the back of her throat. She squatted her legs and they went out behind her, and when she did that, she started to stumble towards us, screaming and crying in a gurgled moan. I looked at James, who had his gun drawn on her. He was crying profusely, tears running down his cheeks. He was mumbling, shaking all over his body. The girl at this point hadn't made a move towards him, and when she did, he shot her in the shoulder. She turned, screamed, and cried, then began to run at him. He opened fire upon her again, unloading the entire magazine into her. She wouldn't fall. He turned and yelled at me.
Bill, shoot it!
I did as I was told, aiming at her and unloading my whole magazine as well. As we sat there, minds running blanks, we just stared at each other. James slowly grabbed his radio and held it tight in his hand, shaking slightly.
We have a code 1096 on location N.
After that was sent, 15 minutes later, a team of men wearing MOPP gear stepped out of Humvees, telling us to get in the vehicle. As I got in and drove away, I saw the men in suits pour gasoline onto the thing we shot and burn the body. I quit that night. What I saw that night is something I will never forget and will never leave my mind. I don't have answers to the things I think about at night. And now that I'm typing this, those are answers I realize I don't want to learn. I'm a guy who's old enough to know better, and still young enough not to care. That's my motto anyway, or it was until what I'm about to tell you happened. Beyond drinking, I personally do not take any substances, but I don't judge or care if you do them. Whatever you do is your own business. But drinking, though, I'm a fish. I can hold my own against the best drinkers. All of this is relevant to the story. Even though I don't indulge in any mind-altering substances, I seem to hang out with quite a few people who do. So a friend of mine called me, informing me of a crazy weekend-long party in the woods coming up. When my friends throw a party, it's always something that feels like an end-of-the-world event. It was late in the fall in upstate New York. If you're unfamiliar with upstate New York, it is beautiful. Nothing except for woods in all directions, lots of great camping areas. It's a nature lover's paradise. I'm 6'3", and at the time I was a good 220 pounds. I got my truck ready, a Chevy 2500. I cleaned it up first and got it ready to sleep in. I like camping, but I hate sleeping on the ground, so I put 2 cot mattresses in the back with 3 pillows and 2 comforters. I filled my coolers up, one with food and the other with beer and liquor. I said see you later to my dad and hit the road, heading off to this party. By about 6 p.m. I showed up. I enjoy being fashionably late. You see, while I'm not afraid of hard work, I had no idea if I planned to stay the whole time, so I wasn't about to get there and set up all their stuff for them. The area in question was down a dirt road way off the beaten path. A small open area of trees led to an open area surrounded by trees. When I got there, I was taken back. There had to be over 20 vehicles parked there. There were also 10 porta-johns past the cars on the left, next to the wall of trees. As I looked to the right, I could see people sitting around an area preparing a fire. Past that was a projector set up to a makeshift widescreen. I was immediately hit in the face by a stench and a delicious smell at the same time, which was from a certain dank plant being smoked and sausages. I turned my head to the right more and saw that there were 2 grills going, and they were cooking sausages and burgers. Sure enough, there was a guy cooking on both with a stogie in his mouth. I made a sour face and sighed. Oh well, here we go again, I thought, dealing with my mentally suppressed friends and their enjoyment of something I still don't understand. Anyway, I pulled my truck in close to where the fire was, not giving a crap about how some guy was trying to tell me where to park. I smiled as I slid out of my truck. Towering over him, I asked, "You want a cold beer? I don't feel like walking back and forth, and I'm not about to carry my cooler any further than I have to." He laughed and shook my hand, introducing himself. At that point, I realized I didn't know many of these people. I handed him a beer, locked my truck, and went looking for my friend who had invited me here. I found him finishing up his creation of the projector screen. I asked him what he planned on showing. "Music, my good man, music. Gotta get the ladies in the mood for a good time." He thought he was a ladies' man, and I humor him on it. He starts whatever he calls music and lights up a smoke. He informs me that way more people are coming and it's going to be a heck of a weekend. I light up a smoke and inform him that I'm only here for the ladies. He looked out and smiled at where I parked. "Good view from there," he said. "Fishing with the right kind of bait, too." We both had a good laugh. Fast forward a few hours and it's about 11 p.m. None of the girls had really piqued my interest. I'm picky and have a type for the future misses. I go back to my cooler and grab my Johnny Walker. Figured I might as well get myself toasty and pass out, then head home tomorrow. I turned back around to see a girl I hadn't seen before. She was talking with the other folks and joined a ring of people passing around a joint. I walked up to my friend, not even looking at him, and I asked, "Dude, who's the girl in the pink leather jacket?" After what felt like 5 minutes, I turned to look at him with the serious look I get when I see something I want. He wasn't even paying attention. I asked him again, and he turned to me, saying, "What?" So for the third time I asked, "Who's the girl in the pink leather jacket?" He replied, "I've no idea, my man. I told you a lot of people were coming." I gave him that look and he started laughing. I remembered he was staring at something and asked him what he was staring at. He said that he thought he saw something in the wood line, but it was probably the fire playing with the shadows. It was loud with the music going, and everyone was feeling good. I shook it off and walked up to the girl in the pink leather jacket. I introduced myself and asked her her name. She was gorgeous, long dirty blonde hair with icy blue eyes and fair skin. She was short too, fit most of my criteria, which was awesome. She turned to me and smiled. I could have melted right there. Then she said,
"Wouldn't you like to know?"
Attitude. Yeah, I was smitten. We started talking some more. She was a bit strange, though. She kept staring off into space while we talked. She kept pace in the conversation perfectly for someone who was on a mind-altering substance while staring off into space. She stopped abruptly and walked back over to the crowd of people I managed to pull her away from a few minutes ago. So I joined them all as well. After about another hour, the group shifted into 3 separate units. The girl was happy to sit on my tailgate with me in our group. She kept her 100-yard stare going, though. My friend pulled me aside and asked me about it. I told him I had no idea, so he told me that she wasn't the only weird one that showed up. Even with his mental state, he knew not to just point at someone, as he nodded in the direction of a man. So I let him talk while I gave this man the once-over and made some monitoring of him. He was strange, looked homeless. He barely spoke, and he awkwardly fumbled about. His clothes were dirty and his jacket was old and ragged. He had a vodka bottle in his right hand, and he would open the bottle and take a sip every so often. He kept saying something about having to go pee. It was about 2 a.m. at this point. My friend said something about everyone hitting the bathroom before he turned all the lights off, so the girls all went to the bathroom in a hurry and fast. All except for the girl in the pink jacket. She stayed sitting on the tailgate with me. So I joined her, and I informed her that if she wanted, she could share the bed of my truck with me. She'd have her own bed and pillow and comforter. She smiled, pushing me onto my back and giving me a kiss I'll never forget. She had been smoking and drinking all night, yet she tasted like a breath of fresh air, sweet and smooth. I was wide awake then. Some of the girls were making their way back to the tents. She said,
Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back.
She rolled off of me and the tailgate very fast. I was up quick and looked to make sure she was okay. She didn't even make a sound and was already walking toward the toilets. I had a great view of her walking away. As I smiled to myself, I saw the weird guy with the vodka bottle. He was headed toward the toilets, about 20 feet behind her. I'm a chivalrous man, a southern upbringing, so I then too rolled off the tailgate, nowhere near as graceful as she had been. I hit the ground and it hurt, but I got up quick to head over toward the toilets, where she went and that man had followed. My friend stopped me to make sure I was okay. I was trying to hurry him up because I didn't want anything to happen to her. So when I made sure he knew I was okay in his stupor, I started walking very fast toward the bathrooms. I had all kinds of bad mental images of what I would find when I got to the toilets. I was about 100 feet away from the bathrooms when everyone was shook to the core by a scream. It wasn't human. It sounded like a mixture between an animal's and a man's. The porta potties were in rows of 5. The back row was closest to the trees and had been knocked over, and I saw blood everywhere. My gun was in my hand and my flashlight was in the other. The last stall to the left of the 5 was where the blood trail started. Leading to the woods, there was the vodka bottle completely whole. The smell of blood and a rotting smell was filling my nose then, and the man's jacket was shredded in the trees with blood all over it. There was hair everywhere. I was sweating at this point, terrified. It all happened so fast. I saw the man's arm, covered in hair, and it was no longer attached to his body. I held back a gag reflex. As I did, a branch snapped. Instantaneously, the flashlight went toward the noise. I would make out what was left of the man's body. He was missing an arm, a hand, his lower half, and his head. That's not all. He had chunks ripped from what was left of him. Then, what I can only describe as a white furry hand had plunged itself through his sternum. It was covered in a thick black goo, almost like tar. I took all of this in quickly, and it hit me that the thing that did this was behind his body. The creature had one icy blue eye, which was puffy and watery, and one golden amber eye. The LED flashlight I had illuminated everything. It was like some sort of disgusting horror film, like some sort of bear tearing apart a robot if I was in a science fiction movie. The most important thing hit me just before the others were about 20 feet from me. This creature was wearing a pink leather jacket. I could make out the bottom right zipper, as it seemed to be holding the man's body to hide itself. Just as everyone was about 5 feet from me, it threw the man's body, sending me backwards into everyone. What happened next was chaos. Screaming, vomiting, and running. The only person in their right mind was me, and even to me, none of this made sense. I was pushing people out of my way to get to my truck. I grabbed Tommy and carried him to my truck, throwing him in through the driver's side door. Then I climbed in, just as I heard the saddest sounding howl I'd ever heard. A mixture of sadness and longing came from the trees where that thing had disappeared into. My friend and I were on the highway headed back to his place when we finally said anything to each other. He thanked me for getting him, but I just shook my head. Neither of us slept that night, and no one talked about it. We went back in the morning to get my friend's car and all his stuff. There was nothing there to support that anything happened at all. No blood on the ground, no parts in the woods, no ripped clothing. And I have no idea what happened that night. I'm no layman to cryptids. This was not some story designed to keep you from sleeping. It was me sharing something that happened to me with you. What was the girl in the pink leather jacket? And that weird man in the jacket, who had hair all over his arms and smelled like feces and unwashed disgustingness? When his torso was thrown at me, it was hairy too, and his blood was more of a thick black goo. There was also human-like red blood on the ground too, by the porta potties. For sanity's sake, perhaps that man was a skinwalker. I'm okay with saying that out loud, sure, fine. But what about the girl in the pink leather jacket? Were they hunting each other? The more I've thought about that night, the more I realized she was staring at him, not off into space, the whole time. She waited until the other girls were coming back from the bathrooms before making her way to them. Women go to the bathroom in groups for safety and for girl talk, I think. It was all deliberate. What can do that to a skinwalker, though? I've read some pretty creepy stuff about them. I don't know what to say, except that if she was not there that night, someone might have died. Someone is hunting skinwalkers in northern New York. This all happened 5 years ago. Back then, I was the type of person who wouldn't believe until you see it. And now, I might as well just believe. I've heard loads of monsters and ghost stories in my life. I found them very thrilling. So thrilling that when I had the chance, I would daydream about me in a situation when I would be hunted down by some unknown creature. I'd have to find a way to stop it. My friend Larry was also interested in the paranormal. He and I would sit around my laptop, looking up creepy stories and paranormal creatures. The stories we found would always grab our attention. We'd make comments about what we would do if we were in that person's shoes. I was at his house one day. It was almost evening, and a few cars were driving by since he lived in a remote area. There was a tree line not too far away from his backyard. Larry and I would go on walks there, taking the sights and atmosphere of the woods. Little did I know that my perception of those woods would soon change forever. After nightfall, Larry was at the sofa watching television. I was on my phone watching some of my favorite YouTube videos. I was getting tired though, so I got up and told Larry that I was going to bed. Larry said okay, and I left to walk up the stairs to one of the rooms he said that I could use. As the beds were very close to the window, I could see the awesome night sky. The moon and stars glowed brightly above the dark silhouettes of the trees. Soon my eyes grew heavier, beckoning me to at least close them, falling into a deep slumber. I woke up sometime later. It was still dark. I just couldn't sleep anymore, and I didn't know why I couldn't. I tried to close my eyes, but they would just fly open again, as if refusing to sleep. Finally, giving in at the fact that I couldn't sleep again, I sat up. Now, I didn't know if Larry was sleeping or watching television still. He was infamous for watching TV from dusk till dawn. The first thing I did was to look out the window. Still saw the moon and stars, and I saw the woods not too far away. There were lots of deer around, mind you, and most of them wandered too close to Larry's backyard. As expected, that night I did see a deer in his yard. It was sniffing around the grass. Larry had a tall gate that surrounded his backyard, I guess to not let anything in, but obviously that didn't always work. Anyway, I was staring at this deer for a while, and then it stopped eating the grass. Its ears perked up, and it began to stare at the tree line. I followed its gaze. Over there, the woods were as dark as ever. I couldn't see anything except the tall, dark shapes of trees. What was this animal looking at? My guess was some kind of predator. The deer stood there quietly. It was like the whole area was put under a time-stop spell. I grew worried. I didn't know what this deer was looking at, but I had a burning sensation that it wasn't good. And then the deer dashed away in fright, and something came dashing out of that tree line. Some kind of animal that I've never seen before. It was all black, so all I saw was just a giant black mass charging from out of the trees at first. I could see pointed ears, a long snout showing dirty teeth. The eyes reflected a bright yellow with small pupils. It was on all fours, so my first thought was that it was a wolf. But I couldn't recall anyone around these parts reporting wolves in the area. And this thing was far too large. I watched it walk slowly, its heavy footsteps pounding the ground underneath. It looked left and right, all the while smelling the air, probably looking for more prey or food, probably looking for me. At that thought, I ducked down, covering myself like a scared child who had just seen a terrifying monster emerge from his closet. I didn't move, I didn't cry, I didn't speak. I laid there, praying to God that this creature, or whatever it was, didn't find its way into the house. And if it did, Larry and I would be done for. Then I woke up again. I had fallen asleep again somehow, because now the sun was up. I was so thankful that it was dawn. I jumped out of bed and walked into the hallway, only to hear Larry calling my name from the back door that led to the backyard. I found him, and I was met by a confused and scared look on his face. He pointed and looked down at something in the grass. "What kind of animal makes tracks this huge?" he asked. My heart sank. Those paw prints were in the place where that wolf creature thing was standing the night before. I had to steady my breath so Larry wouldn't notice. Then he turned in my direction looking at something else. And what kind of animal makes claw marks that deep and long? He motioned me over to look where he was facing, and my jaw dropped. There was a multitude of deep claw marks in the back door. This only leaves me with one conclusion. The wolf monster was real, and it tried to get inside. It's funny how some memories from childhood stick with you. Most of the time, I can barely remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. But this one night, from when I was 11, it's burned into my brain like it happened last night. This was back in '92. I was in the 5th grade. My best friends were Tommy and Jesse. Tommy lived out on the edge of town, where the suburbs started giving way to farmland. His house backed up to this big open field that led to a hill that we called the Mound. It wasn't much of a hill, really, but when you're a kid, everything seems bigger. It was a Friday night. We were having a sleepover at Tommy's place. But this wasn't going to be any ordinary sleepover. No, we had plans, big plans. We were going to be real adventurers. You see, Tommy's parents had finally agreed to let us camp out on top of the mound. Well, sort of. We could go up there with our sleeping bags and backpacks, hang out until 9 p.m., then come back to sleep in the house. It wasn't exactly roughing it in the wilderness, but to us, it was the height of adventure. We'd been planning this for weeks. Our school backpacks were stuffed with all the essentials: flashlights, comic books, enough snacks to feed a small army, and of course our trusty Swiss Army knives. We felt like real explorers, ready to tame the wild half-mile between Tommy's back porch and the top of the mound. Tommy's mom made us sandwiches for dinner, reminding us for the 100th time to be careful and stay together. We nodded impatiently, eager to get started on our grand expedition. As soon as we finished eating, we were out the door, our backpacks weighing us down as we set off across the field. The sun was just starting to set as we began our trek. The mound loomed ahead of us, awaiting us under a darkened sky. Jesse was the worrier of the group. He kept glancing back at Tommy's house, which was growing smaller behind us. "You're not scared, are you?" I teased. Jesse puffed up. "No way. I was just making sure we're going the right direction." Tommy laughed. "It's a straight line, dummy. We can't get lost." We continued on, the tall grass of the field giving way to the steeper, rockier slope of the mound. It wasn't a difficult climb, but we took our time anyway, pretending we were scaling some great mountain peak When we finally reached the top, we were out of breath, but grinning from ear to ear. "We made it," Tommy crowed, dropping his backpack and raising his arms up in victory. "We've conquered the mound." Jesse and I cheered along with them, caught up in the moment. We felt like kings of the world, looking down at the twinkling lights of our small town spread out below us. We then set about making our camp, which mostly consisted of laying out our sleeping bags in a rough circle, piling up our snacks in the middle. Tommy had brought a small battery-powered lantern, which we placed in the center of the circle. It cast a warm glow over the little campsite. As the last traces of daylight faded from the sky, we broke into our snacks and started to tell ghost stories. You know, the usual stuff kids tell around a campfire. Hook-handed killers, vengeful spirits. Jesse was in the middle of a particularly creepy tale about a babysitter and a killer hiding upstairs, when Tommy went still. Then he spoke. "Guys," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "look up there." We followed his gaze up to the night sky. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just stars twinkling like they always did. But then I saw it, a light brighter than any star, moving slowly across the sky. "It's just a plane," Jesse said, but he didn't sound convinced. The light was moving too slowly to be a plane, and it was getting bigger, brighter, much brighter. "Maybe it's a meteor," I suggested, my voice shaking a bit. But it wasn't like any meteor I'd ever seen or read about. The light kept growing, from a pinprick to the size of a dime, then a quarter. It was so bright it hurt to look at directly, but we couldn't take our eyes off of it. That's when things got fuzzy. I remember the light getting so bright it seemed to fill the whole sky. I remember a humming sound so low I felt it more than heard it, and I remember feeling very, very sleepy all of a sudden. The next thing I knew, someone was shaking me awake. I opened my eyes to find Tommy's dad leaning over me, looking worried. "You kids okay?" he asked, helping me sit up. "We've been calling for you for about an hour." I looked around, disoriented. Tommy and Jesse were just waking up too, looking as confused as I felt. Our campsite was a mess, sleeping bags twisted, snacks scattered everywhere. The lantern was off, its batteries apparently dead. "What happened?" Tommy asked, his voice groggy. His dad sighed. "No idea. You had us worried sick. Why didn't you come back at 9 like we agreed?" We looked at each other baffled. How could it already be past 9? It felt like we just laid down in our sleeping bags only a few minutes ago. "We must have fallen asleep," Jesse said, but he didn't sound sure. Tommy's dad helped us pack up our things and led us back down the mound. As we walked, I was trying to piece together what had happened. The ghost stories, the light in the sky, and then nothing. It was like someone had just erased a few hours of my memory. What time had we arrived at the mound? And it was already past 9? It didn't make sense. When we got back to Tommy's house, his mom was waiting for us on the porch. She looked mad at first, then relief washed over her face when she saw us. She hugged each of us in turn, then sent us off to get ready for bed. As I was brushing my teeth, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror and froze. There, just behind my ear, was a small, perfectly round bruise. I hadn't noticed it before, and I had no idea how I'd gotten it. When I asked Tommy and Jesse later, they both found similar marks on themselves. Tommy on his neck, Jesse on his shoulder. We tried to talk about what happened, but none of us could make sense of it. We agreed to keep it to ourselves. Who was going to believe us? The next morning, Tommy's parents seemed to have chalked up the whole incident to us being irresponsible kids, who fell asleep and lost track of time. We didn't correct them. How could we explain something we didn't understand ourselves? Life went on, and for a while we didn't talk about that night on the mound. But things had changed. We had changed. Jesse suddenly became obsessed with UFOs and aliens, spending hours in the library reading every book he could find on the topic. Tommy, on the other hand, refused to even look at the mound. He kept his bedroom curtains closed at night and would change the channel if anything about aliens came on TV. As for me, I found myself watching the sky more often, especially at night. I'd wake up sometimes, heart racing, convinced I'd seen a bright light outside my window. But it was always just the moon, or a streetlight, or me waking from a dream. About a month after our camping trip, Tommy called me in the middle of the night. He was whispering, his voice shaking. "It's back," he said. "The light. It's over the mound right now." I rushed to my window, peering out into the darkness. I couldn't see the mound from my house, but the sky in that direction did seem brighter than it was supposed to be. "What do we do?" I asked. "Nothing," Tommy replied. "We pretend we never saw it. We never talk about this again, okay?" I agreed, wondering why he even called me then. But I couldn't help feeling like we were making a mistake, like we were ignoring something important. The years went by, and we grew up. During high school, Jesse moved away. His family relocated for his dad's job. Tommy and I drifted apart, as childhood friends sometimes do. Every now and then, I might run into Tommy during one of my college breaks. Whenever I heard from Jesse again, he was still very much into UFOs, but in a more academic way. He was studying astronomy, he told me, hoping to work for SETI one day. Tommy, though, well, Tommy never got over that night. He joined the military right out of high school, saying he wanted to be as far from the mound as possible. Eventually, he got his wish, and I stopped seeing him during those college breaks I mentioned. I guessed he made it somewhere overseas, or to a different state, to do training. I tried to put it all behind me. I told myself it was simply a weird childhood experience, one possibly fueled by too many sci-fi movies and wild imaginations. Even so, I wonder. I can't help but feel I'm lying to myself. I've never gone back to the mound. Not sure I could, even if I wanted to. Last I heard, they built a subdivision there, turning our childhood adventure spot into a cluster of cookie-cutter houses. But part of me is glad. At least kids won't be camping up there anymore, risking, well, whatever it was we encountered. But it also feels like I lost something important. It feels like there was a mystery there, something bigger than us, and we just walked away from it. Maybe we were made to walk away from it. I don't know. Maybe I should finally give it a rest, stop thinking about it. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved after all. I'll leave you with this. Sometimes I still check behind my ear, half expecting to see that perfectly round bruise again. And whenever I look up at the night sky, I feel like something might be looking back.